More brandy, sir?
No, Brandon.
Well, that's how the story goes. I'm not going to vouch for it, of course, but the commission is over here. It's signed by Prince Rupert. It's for my ancestor, Ralph Musgrave. Yes, to join his cavalry troop at Edge Hill.
Rupert's seal and commission, Holmes. Astonishing.
It's one of the boots worn that day.
Oh.
If I may be so bold, sir. The boot was worn by his brother, Sir Roland Musgrave, at Naseby.
It was it indeed. As my butler was once a schoolmaster, I must bow to his scholarship over mine in matters of my own family's history.
The following film podcast frequently contains adult content, including foul language and descriptions of adult situations. Spoilers for the films discussed occur often. Listener discretion is advised. Now take it away, Dr. Rausch.
They must be destroyed on sight.
All right, welcome back to They Must Be Destroyed on Sight, episode 180. And I am your host, Lee, the origins of the Piccolo Russell, joined by my co-host, Daniel. Thank heavens he was wearing his trousers, Harper. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. I only have the problem that 180 is definitely even, and even if it wasn't even, it would definitely not be prime, and so I don't have a math joke to make based on trigonometry or whatever. And I feel really disrupted by that. I really feel like we should have saved this for a mathematically significant number. But other than that, I'm doing well.
Yeah, well, you should have warned me about that ahead of time, because I'm so shit at math, I wouldn't have known the difference.
Yeah.
So, and we are once again joined by our friend Jack, scattered throughout the length and breadth of this peninsula. Graham, how are you doing, sir?
Fine, thanks for having me back again. I always try to guess what the quote you'll give me will be, and I never manage it.
In 180 episodes, I've never gotten it either, so it's fine, Jack.
That's the problem. I put so little thought into it that everyone probably just overthinks it when they're.
Well, this is it. If minimal thought works, go with it.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I've lived my life.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're continuing with Sherlock Holmes adaptations. This time we're breaking our rule and we're just doing a TV show. So, I mean, technically these are mini movies, but
we're phoning it in. Is ultimately what we're doing.
Yeah, but we like the Jeremy Brett stuff so much that we had Jack suggest 3 more Jeremy Brett episodes, and excellent ones to talk about. And after this, we're going to do something else, and then we're going to move on to the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes from the Guy Ritchie guy who did those movies.
Yeah, in another year, we're just going to be doing episodes of Friends because we'll just be done.
Yeah, no, we're not going to be doing that. I hate that show.
Yeah, Seinfeld.
I hate that show too, actually.
Mad About You?
No.
Suddenly Susan?
No. You're in the wrong decade, dude. You're like totally in the wrong decade.
90s sitcoms are my bag, man. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
You and Stephen Moffat.
Yeah.
No. But I'm better at criticizing them than Stephen Moffat is. You know how I know? I've watched the Stephen Moffat episode, so we're fine.
No, if we ever do the WKRP in Cincinnati podcast, you got me there. But
okay.
I have an anecdote. I have an anecdote about WKRP Cincinnati, if you want to hear it.
Mm-hmm.
I used to stay up late to watch late night television when it started on ITV in the late 80s. It was in Britain up until the late 80s, television just used to stop around about sort of 11 o'clock, and then suddenly ITV started doing television all through the night. It was tremendously exciting. You had to be there, I know, but it was. And ITV just used to fill up the all through the night schedule with just any old crap they could get. And some of it became absolutely appointment television for me as like, an 11-year-old kid staying up to watch Sledgehammer and Married with Children. And
oh God, Married with Children. I grew up on that show. So
yeah.
much.
And one night, I think I'm remembering this rightly, they used to do a thing where the presenter would say, we're going to put a movie on, and it's this movie or that movie, and you phone in to vote for what movie you want.
Oh.
And like 4 people would call in because those are the only people that had a telephone in Britain in the 1980s, right?
Exactly.
That's the
Yeah, and
answer.
it was
Yeah, I know.
yeah, and it was like 3 a.m. One night, I think I'm remembering this rightly, the choice was Lindsay Anderson's If, which has subsequently become one of my favorite films of all time.
Yeah.
And Dracula, the 1979 version with Frank Langella. And of course, I'm me at that age, so I want to watch Dracula. I've never seen this one. It's a new Dracula. So that comes on. But it's so late, and I've got to go back to school in the morning that I can't stay up. So I set the timer on the video. I don't know, you youngsters probably don't remember this, but when you had videos and you'd set the timer, you always used to set it to start like 5 minutes in advance of the time that it said in the TV guide, the radio times, as we used to say, just in case it started early, because you didn't want to miss any. So for years, my home recorded VHS copy of the 1979 Dracula with Frank Langella in it had the last 5 minutes of one episode of WKRP in Cincinnati on it. And those two things are now completely linked in my brain.
Yep. No, I get that. Yeah.
If I watch that movie now without first seeing the last 5 minutes of that particular episode of WKRP Cincinnati, I don't feel like I've watched it.
Okay, so what episode of WKRP in Cincinnati was it? That's the real question.
There was a guy who was he was trying to prove that marijuana slowed your reflexes or something.
Yes.
So they got him to smoke marijuana and then do a test where he had to hit a button in response to something live on air. And he was supposed to not be able to do it. And every time he just did it like that, instantaneously. Quicker, and there was I think there was somebody in an animal outfit. It was a chicken suit or a lobster suit. No, it was a pig. It was a pig. Mm-hmm. It was a guy in a pig suit. And I think he was painting the wall or something like that.
Yeah, and he thought it was hallucination. Yeah,
that's right.
The thing for me was that WKRP did air in reruns in my market when I was a kid, and I completely avoided it for terrible reasons. I was a shitty kid and a couple of years younger than you guys, so I have no contextual knowledge of WKRP.
I am absolutely convinced that Bailey Quarters would have been a major influence in your sexual development if you had.
Well, as if you would know anything about that based on us doing 180 episodes together. Maybe we should possibly move past this and actually get into the movies, or not. We could, it's it's fine.
We can talk about Daniel's sexual awakening if you want. I mean
we could believe me, that is the kind of thing we do on this show.
Yeah, but moving on.
Yeah.
We do have a couple comments here, so we'll get to them really quick. Jeff Williams, this time with his spooky recommendation of the week. This is
spoopy. That's what you have to say in October. It's the internet, and it's 2019, and it's October. Spoopy.
No, I don't like that. Don't say that.
Is that like a combination of spooky and poop?
No. It's spoopy is sort of like the cute version of spooky. So instead of it being, actually scary, it's kind of like the cute's kind of scary,
That sounds like that's for cowards who don't want to be scared.
Like me, I am incredibly terrified of everything. So, that's why
I want to be scared by movies when I don't want to be spoopied.
There's no spoopy. Spoopy is cancelled.
There we go. See, Jack.
Fair enough.
You're outvoted.
Jack is the voice of reason on this. I'm outvoted. Anyway, let's do the recommendation.
Yeah, and the coincidence, I had actually just watched this movie the night before he recommended it on the TMBDOS Facebook page. And this
is that the best place to reach us if you were going to try to reach us?
I've heard that somewhere, yeah.
It's been a while since we've heard that, but it is the thing I've heard.
This is Beyond the Door 3, a.k.a. a muck train. from 1989, and this was Beyond the Door was like an Italian film series, and this is just one of those ones where it's like, oh, we've got a movie sitting around, let's give it a title from a popular series, even though it has nothing to do with that series. And
yeah, I'm just thinking of like Behind the Green Door. That's kind of where my headspace is.
So after fleeing a hostile Serbian village, a group of traveling American students seek refuge on a passing train that becomes possessed by a murderous demonic force. Death, dismemberment, and impossible choo-choo physics ensue. An Italian slasher in satanic panic clothing that is silly beyond belief but never becomes self-conscious of its own utterly ridiculous plot contrivances, developments, or characters. Lots and lots of stupid fun and surprisingly well executed considering how extraordinarily goofy it is. You guys really need this grade A cheese in your lives, along with a generous helping of devil horn imagery. Yeah, it is batshit insane, and I enjoyed it. It's a good, terrible Italian horror film.
That train still sounds better than a Virgin train. That's a British person joke. Don't worry about it.
Uh-huh.
That
Although
sounds like a Richard Branson joke to me, to my headspace. But
Same thing. Yeah.
Okay.
And
a muck train sounds like it should be about a train that gets horny every 5 years and has to go back to the station it comes from in order to mate with another train in a highly ritualized manner. That's a Star Trek joke. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's the kind of train where, you know, sometimes the light is green and sometimes the light is red, and it's almost always red until it's green, and then you barrel through it at the highest possible speed.
No, I got the amok time joke. I know Pon Far, sir.
I beg your pardon.
I know Spock and Kirk going shirtless and fighting with big staffs. Yeah.
Now we're talking about your sexual awakening.
We are, yeah, really.
Well, redheads and green skin, those are the two things that Lee knows. So
yeah, and then they had one of those, and well, I don't know if they had it in the original Star Trek series, but they did have it in Enterprise.
No,
they had Orion slave girls with red hair. So, or was it the J.J. Abrams films? I can't remember. One or the other.
I know there's one in the J.J. Abrams film. So
yeah,
I never watched Enterprise. You know why?
Because
nobody watched the Enterprise.
Yeah, because it wasn't that good. It was really bad. We have a YouTube comment, and it's a good one again. 2 weeks in a row.
Wow, that's amazing.
This is from Shadowman4710. Yeah, 7% Solution is a lot of fun, despite some of its more problematic aspects of the whole Muslim maniacs want our women's subplot. The acting is extremely good, Robert Duvall's bizarre quasi-British accent aside, and it's a great-looking 70s film, as you guys point out. As for A Scandal in Bohemia, I've never seen this episode of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and you're right, it sticks to the original storyline pretty closely, only adding things to make the story more understandable. Great job. Oh, thank you very much.
Is he saying great job, or pardon me, I don't know the gender of this person. Are they saying great job to the episode, which they claim not to have seen, or to us for describing the episode that they claim not to have seen?
I'm assuming they're saying that due to us talking about it, they actually went and watched it. So.
Yeah, I like to think that they got halfway through that sentence and then went and found it on YouTube and watched it, and then didn't go back and delete the original thing and No, that's a great comment. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, we should not be critical of any positive
comment. No, we should not. I'm not actually being critical of the comment. I'm very happy about it. I'm just being a douchebag because that's just kind of where my head is right now. But, it's fine. We're fine.
Yeah. But yeah, there you go. Thank you for the comments, guys. And now we can move on to what we've watched in the last little while. I know we all have a little bit something to talk about, so I'll move over to you first, Jack.
Okay, firstly, I want to plug something that's upcoming from me, which is last night I recorded an episode of Watching RoboCop with Kit Power.
Oh.
And that should be up soon, and that was a lot of fun. So look out with that. So one of the things I've been watching recently has been RoboCop. I've seen it before, but I love that movie. If you want to know in detail,
it before you recorded the episode, or did you watch it for the first time while recording the episode? Is the question.
Watching it with Kit, I was watching it. Well, we actually went through this rigmarole at the start of the episode. I tried to calculate exactly how many times I've seen it, and I think we ended up on estimating that it was somewhere between 8 and 10 times. So.
Oh, okay. So you have seen that before. I wasn't
once
sure.
or twice. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's upcoming. If you for some reason like listening to me talk, you can look out for that. Kit's on it anyway, so that's good. I went to see a film. I don't know. It's an obscure
Kit who still owes us royalties for writing the Tommy book. By the way,
yeah,
Kit.
Yeah,
if you're listening, which I know you're not because you're too famous for us now.
That's right. He's too famous for us now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he's forgotten the little people that helped him get to the top. It always happens. Yeah, so I went to see an obscure, little talked about movie that you might have heard of called Joker. There's been a little bit of talk about it, I understand, but not much. Yeah, it's a movie. It's actually about sort of the origins of the obscure comic book character, the Joker.
I heard it was really not funny. Like
it's
not a lot of jokes in it.
That's true. It's not funny. It is definitely not a funny film.
Is that the first part of the trilogy with a toker and a midnight smoker being the second and third part? You know?
No. Right. It's actually the second part of a tetralogy because the first part was Stoker with Mia Wasikowska a few years ago.
Wow.
Wow.
Good pull, I thought.
You two are fucking amazing.
When we out nerd Lee Russell, that's when you know.
Continue, Jack. Continue.
Yeah, that reminds me of that old Leon Herring joke about Richard Herring used to say, "Yeah, I watched 2001, but I didn't really understand it because the last one in the series I watched was 10, and the story has changed a lot in the intervening films." Yeah, so I don't really want to add to the enormous amount of Joker discourse there is, but I'll say this: I liked it. I thought it was good. I might be talking about that on another podcast with Kit and somebody else. We'll let that percolate because hopefully that's going to happen. I watched for the first time the Frank Darabont adaptation of the Stephen King novella The Mist from 2007. Mm-hmm. I hated that. It was well made, but I just hated the whole ethos of the film. It's consciously, saying stuff about the human race, and the human condition. And the things it's saying, I thought were just cynical and juvenile and stupid and nasty. And it just left a bad taste in my mouth. I really didn't like it. It was like Lord of the Flies in a main supermarket. And I hate Lord of the Flies. So, yeah, I didn't like that. And I've also been rewatching the first series of The X-Files for some reason, after not having seen that for years. And I'm kind of surprised by how good it is in some ways and how terrible it is in other ways, but mainly just sitting there marveling at the glorious, transcendent wonder that is Gillian Anderson.
Hasn't she quit now? Like any future seasons of like the revival of X-Files? I think like she's not signed on for them anymore. She's like, I'm not doing it anymore.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So like,
I haven't seen any of the revivals. She says she's had enough now.
Yeah, the revival's not good, and it's like, well, good luck with... I mean, I like David Duchovny and all, but the series did okay without him for a while, too, but not so much Gillian Anderson.
That's right, because it had Robert Patrick in it, who's in who's in Terminator 2, which I've never seen. So,
well, that movie does that even exist? No, that's RoboCop 2 that doesn't exist.
That's RoboCop 2 that doesn't exist.
Yeah, Terminator 2 definitely exists. I have strong opinions about Terminator 2, and you can find that on the same feed with the Kit Power RoboCop podcast. I was doing a live com on that 2 years ago, back when I used to do podcasts about things that weren't genocidal racist. It
was a golden time. But I've talked enough now, I think.
Yeah, Daniel, what have you watched lately?
I have not been listening to Nazi podcasts for the last week, basically. What? For complicated reasons, which you can find out about if you listen to the next episode of the podcast we're about to release. Which, if this is your first, I can't imagine this is anybody's first episode of this podcast. But anyway, if it is, then you find out at the end. It's fine. It would be amazing if suddenly we got 1,000 listeners to this episode, and it was like, oh my God. We have to know what you think of these 3 Jeremy Brett episodes.
What an episode to jump on. Holy shit.
Yeah. Can you imagine this being the first episode? It turns out when you don't spend 30 or 40 hours a week listening to awful people talk about awful things, you watch movies instead. And I mostly just rewatched some stuff, and none of which I particularly want. I rewatched most of Sin City, the original 2005 Sin City, which just made me want to watch a lot of noir because I loved that when I was in my mid-20s. Yeah, it holds up for what it is, but it also just this is not the thing. Anyway, complicated feels about that. But the one thing I really did want to mention, which I wasn't going to mention until this morning when fucking Robert Forster died, is I rewatched Jackie Brown earlier this week. It showed up on Netflix, and I was like, oh yeah, Jackie Brown. I just put it on, and dear God, we should do that movie on this podcast sometime, Lee.
I think we kind of. How long was that podcast we did about?
I honestly don't remember. That was the one episode where I got drunk enough that I do not actually remember recording that episode.
Oh.
Well, clearly that's the one to jump onto.
Lee tells me that was a good episode, but if it was, it's not because of me.
We should do a commentary episode on it maybe sometime.
I would love to do that. It's actually kind of an emotional thing for me because Robert Forster, I saw that movie when I was 18 years old, and Robert Forster was, I think, like 58 at that point. 57, 58, something like that. And now I'm almost 40, and Robert Forster is dead, which means that I'm like halfway between the age that I was then and Robert Forster was then. I always kind of thought like the mechanics of that movie, like sort of that his opinion, like the way he expressed kind of getting older was how I really hoped I would embrace getting older. And I kind of have. It actually like was one of those movies that sort of like, at least in terms of my own kind of personal relationship with like kind of getting gray and white hair and my beard and stuff, it taught me something. It kind of influenced my life, and it's completely through Robert Forster's performance, which is like fucking amazing. I've always kind of taken that like dear to my heart in a weird way, and I fucking love that movie. It's great. Also, I rewatched it, and I've seen that movie 20 or 30 times or something. Like I've rewatched it a lot. I owned that movie. I still own that movie somewhere in this house on VHS. I literally own that movie. VHS, DVD. It's whenever it's streaming, I just kind of put it on. It's great. I realized that I've seen that movie enough to actually like remember the plot. And like my wife was kind of poking me, like, hold on, what's going on here? And I could like, oh no, you don't know this yet. It's fine. I can explain this to you. You're about to find out this and that. It's a gloriously constructed narrative. It's a gloriously constructed detective plot or kind of crime film sort of thing. It's an amazing, amazing film. And I'm only assuming that the episode that I don't remember that we recorded about Jackie Brown was pretty good, and you should probably go listen to that, if nothing else, and to know more about that episode than I do. So
probably one of our best episodes as far as I'm concerned.
I rewatched that movie, and I wasn't even going to talk about it until Robert Forster died. Yeah. I really want to go back and look at like early Robert Forster. I want to do that soon because it's something I was meant to do, and now that he's dead, I feel like maybe we should draw a little attention to him.
Yeah, we could do like some of his better films, or we could do like some of his more exploitation stuff he was doing in the 80s, like Vigilante and Alligator and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I'd love to do some of the exploitation stuff. Honestly, because it made me sad. Like I saw it, and it was just like I was on Twitter like 10 minutes after the initial news reports went out that he died, and I saw somebody will go R.I.P. Robert Forster, and I went fuck.
Yeah,
it's just like that was one of those like
Did you hear what it was too?
No, I didn't hear. I didn't even know what it was.
Fucking brain cancer.
Oh God!
And from what I've read, died surrounded by friends and family. Sounds like something he probably knew he had for a while, and he was still working right up until 2019.
Yeah, still because what else are you gonna? I mean, a mensch, if we can say that. Yeah.
Anyway. Apparently super high IQ too. He was a member of like one of those, not Mensa, but like another one that was 99th percentile of. Don't make me dislike him.
Don't do that to me. Don't tell me he was like obsessed with his high IQ. And he was, I would much rather remember him as Max Cherry.
Yeah.
As the working actor who, continued to work till his last days, even when he had brain cancer. Than to think that he was like a member of Mega or, the 3 Alpha Society or whatever the fuck that thing is. Like, anyway.
Yeah.
Don't tell me he got into Evo Psych in his last couple of years and was like, it turns out that the white race is the superior race. Like, oh, God, that would be terrible.
I kind of really did it. That just sort of transitions over to what I've watched recently.
We didn't plan this at all. We never planned.
We didn't actually. Yeah. This actually just happened by certain. Like, I actually didn't hear that he died until after I watched this, too. And it came out on the day he fucking died. El Camino, the Breaking Bad movie, which is basically like the epilogue to the Jesse story at the end of the Breaking Bad series. Really good. Surprisingly
Did you watch the show?
Oh, I watched the show. Yeah. But you don't need to have seen the show, actually, to like this movie. It's that well done. There are flashbacks. There is fan service stuff where there's flashbacks with like new scenes shot with people from the show and everything, right? You know, Walter White has an appearance, and Mike has an appearance, and there's a bunch of stuff involving basically the time that Jesse spent imprisoned by the neo-Nazis who were running drugs or whatever, you know, where he's making the meth for them, and he's in that fucking cage they keep him in. The the baby-faced neo-Nazi there, Todd, he comes back, although he's noticeably fatter than he was in the series, 30, 40 pounds fatter.
Jesse Plemons, who is a phenomenal actor, and you know, like you wish, like that last season, I don't know, we have problems with that season in this household, but it's fine. Yeah, I'm hoping to watch that soon myself. I just haven't had the chance in the last 24 hours. So,
but I won't spoil anything. But I mean, I thought it was really good. I honestly thought it was way better than I really expected it to be, because I just thought it was going to be okay. We're just banking off the name of Breaking Bad or whatever, but it was actually fantastic. It's a low key, almost minimalist 70s crime film kind of approach to it. It's not like a lot of action or explosions or something you might expect maybe if they were trying to make a Breaking Bad movie. It's just it's basically just about Jesse trying to get the fuck out of town. That's all the movie is just he just keeps running into situations that are keeping him in town, and he's got to find a way out. Robert Forster reprises his character as the guy who changes your identity for you for a fee and gives you a new life. And the scene with him is great in it. Jesse comes to his vacuum shop and tries to get his identity changed, and there's this whole great scene with that. I loved it. I thought it was great. It's one of the best movies I've seen this year, actually. It's that good.
Oh, well, I'll definitely have to watch it before the end of the year then, for sure.
I must get on and watch Breaking Bad one of these days.
Well, like I said, you don't actually have to watch Breaking Bad to enjoy this movie, because everything's easy to follow. The flashbacks, even though they are fan service, and they're like, oh yeah, Walter White and this and that, you don't actually have to know who any of those people are. The movie explains it enough. Like, it gives you enough hints of what happened. And also, if you had seen the series and you'd forgotten, Netflix provides you a 4-minute highlight reel of here's what happened in the actual series in case you fucking forgot. And now here's the movie. So,
that's thoughtful.
Yeah, so you can do that. You know, Netflix always looking out for us, the consumer.
Yeah. I ended Breaking Bad in the last year or so. I didn't watch it at all until and then I kind of mainlined it, and I listened to the Breaking Bad Insider podcast, which was made by one of the editors who worked on the show and brought on people and did. It was sort of one of the, but kind of as a fan from the inside, it was kind of this weird thing. And that was kind of the ideal thing, was to kind of absorb it through that process. It was great. Also, as someone studying organic chemistry, it's also nice to know, this, it makes me feel like a badass. I can go blow things up. It's fine. We're good.
Yeah,
we're good.
Make some blue meth and,
Yeah, no. The chemistry is mostly good in the show. It's mostly very, very good.
Anarchist Cookbook good?
Probably even better than that, honestly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not that I would know anything about anything on that level.
My main priority with drama is the chemistry. Accurate.
Yeah, no.
Well, yeah.
The main thing that you learn doing organic chemistry is how to pronounce things like 2,4,6-trinitrotoluene, which is the correct chemical name for TNT,
This is a
and how to make
show,
it.
Daniel. I will not have you use that language on this podcast.
So I'm not saying I know how to make dynamite, but any person that's taken year 2 of organic or second semester organic chemistry knows how to make it. The question is, can you make it safely? That's always the question with organic chemistry. Anyway, we should move away from this topic.
Really should, before you put us on a fucking watch list of some sort, Daniel.
If we're not already on a watch list, it's fine.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to play a little bit of music, some podcast promos, and we're going to come back with some Jeremy Brett goodness.
You ungodly warlock.
Great coffee.
Hey. Chad, who's that strange, somber man on the cover of that book you're reading?
Oh, that's H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, I've heard of him, but I never really got into his stuff. It's kind of strange and hard to read.
No, I used to think that too. But that all changed when I started listening to the H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast.
What's that?
The H.P. Lovecraft Literary Podcast is a weekly podcast.
Tell me more.
Well, these two really smart and hilarious guys give a synopsis of the story, then they talk about its background, the critical views, and what it says about the author.
Well, where can I listen?
Let me tell you, Chris, you can go to hppodcraft.com or, heck, just subscribe through iTunes iTunes. It's that easy.
Oh, Chad, I'm so excited. Now I can listen to this podcast and pretend to all my snooty friends that I actually read and understand H.P. Lovecraft.
Hey, that's what I do. Oh, dear.
HPPodcraft.com.
Looking for something different in your podcast library? Then why not check out the podcast Under the Stairs? I'm the host Duncan McLeish, and joining me each week will be a special guest as we examine some classic, old school horror favourites, as well as some modern classics. That's not to say that we don't tackle some of the, let's say, more questionable entries into the horror genre. And if all that wasn't enough, we have a subset of shows called Baz v Horror, where our horror novice, the Baz, tackles horror in all shapes and forms to see who will come out victorious. So what are you waiting for? The show can be found at podcastunderthestairs.wordpress.com and on Stitcher and iTunes. The Podcast Under the Stairs is a proud member of Legion Podcast Network. This is Duncan McLeish from Under the Stairs, signing off.
You ungodly warlock.
The Norwood Builder from 1985, directed by Ken Grieve, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, John Hawksworth, and Richard Harris. Not that Richard Harris, a different Richard Harris. Jeremy Brett as Sherlock Holmes, David Burke as Dr. John Watson, Rosalie Crutchley as Mrs. Lexington, Colin Jeavons as Lestrade, Matthew Sloan as John Hector McFarlane, Jonathan Adams as Jonas Odeaker, Helen Ryan as Miss McFarlane, Rosalie Williams as Miss Hudson, Andy Rashley as the Constable, Anthony Langdon as Tramp, and Ted Carroll as Seafaring Tramp. And we have a synopsis here from Gary, KMCD. Knowing that he's about to be arrested for murder, John Hector McFarlane asks Sherlock Holmes' assistance in establishing his innocence. McFarlane is a solicitor who was visited the previous day by Jonas Oldacre, who wanted to draw up a will. McFarlane is astonished to learn that Oldacre was naming him as the beneficiary of his fortune. McFarlane had never met the man who claimed to have known his parents long ago, and having no issue of his own, wanted to leave everything to him. McFarlane drew up papers and called at Oldacre's home that evening to have everything signed, but sometime in the night, the man was killed and the body burned beyond all recognition. Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard thinks it is an open and shut case, but after Holmes interviews McFarlane's mother, he thinks there is something else afoot. And we'll move over to Jack first for his general thoughts on this.
I love this. This is one of my favorites of the early seasons. It's a natty little individual mystery. After last week when we did the almost a two-parter, the final problem in the empty house, where it's all what we would now call mythos and arc, in the 80s version of those things, where it's Moriarty, the arch enemy, and Holmes's death, and then he comes back to life and everything. We said a bit last week about how it didn't really work for us, and we preferred, well, I certainly agreed with what you said about how, Holmes is better when it's it's a bit like the X-Files, the Monster of the Week episodes were the best. This is one of those. This is the Monster of the Week episode, and it's great. I love this one. I love the performances. I love Rosalie Crutchley as the fantastically nasty housekeeper. Brett is fantastic in this. I love his Holmes just completely callous about this young man who's obviously terrified, and he's just obviously thrilled. That wonderful bit where he says, "Dear me," like that, and you can tell he doesn't give a shit about this guy. He's so happy to have this fascinating dramatic mystery arrive on his doorstep, and I love that, and I love his fit of despairing depression when he thinks he's lost, and I love the rivalry with Lestrade, and I love how what an oily, nasty, sarcastic, jealous little tick Lestrade is. I love some of the undercurrents of the story. This is a really good example of something you get a lot in Conan Doyle, which is weird undercurrents about, sex and misogyny and stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff like that in this one, bubbling under the surface. I love the little detour where Holmes goes and sits and talks to a tramp for hours and kind of communes with the life of a tramp. And I think it's just great, this one. I love this one.
Daniel.
One thing that gets missed in a lot of the sort of commentary about Holmes, or the sort of satires, or the sort of responses, is the level of Holmes putting on a bunch of makeup and hanging out with like disreputable people, and I find it delightful. Like, it's one of the things, and this series, the ones we've watched from this series, really like highlight that. I do love that element. I love this one, because I don't know. I love it for the reasons that I love kind of all these. Is that Holmes is not kind of super genius, like kind of like extracting data from the ether kind of thing, but it's all based on just sort of like regular things that he just sort of notices. And I love that like Watson is kind of starting to, he'll poke Watson. Watson, I've reached this conclusion. Tell me how I reached this. He's like trying to teach Watson the methods, and Watson's kind of going along with it. I kind of love that aspect to it. Like, oh no, you've got papers, you got this kind of watch, you got this kind of, and it's like, oh no, it's great. I love that Lestrade shows up and it's like, yeah, we're gonna like take this guy. Well, no, can you give me 30 minutes? I'd really like to keep questioning him. Oh yeah, sure, feel free. And then like pulls up a chair. Go ahead, question him in front of us. This is great, please do our work for us. And it is very much, it's kind of, the antagonism, the kind of like weird relationship that he has with Lestrade, where they work together, but also there's kind of both a kind of ego kind of, dick measuring contest going on between them. But also just they're kind of working at cross purposes in a lot of ways, where like Holmes isn't necessarily interested in that. And I feel like, at least in terms of kind of my understanding of the Holmes stories, there's not ever like direct antagonism, but that's something that gets picked up in the kind of noir stories that kind of take on from the same kind of general pattern. And I just love that Lestrade thinks he's got him, like, oh no, we've got this solved, it's fine.
Finally I win.
I win, and he's like really rubbing it in, and then Holmes is like, yeah, you completely, you missed the entire point. It's kind of delightful. You get to burn some straw, like that's always fun. Burn straw inside. Yeah. I don't know, any movie that has burning straw inside of an old English house. Yeah, no, I'm down for that. It's great.
Yeah, that old trope.
No. You literally smoke them out. It's I don't know. It's so simple, and yet like it works so well. It's a great like 50 minutes of television. It's delightful.
I love Jeremy Brett in this. His performance is so modulated. There's times where he's so, you feel like he's 5 seconds away from reaching out and throttling Lestrade.
Oh God, he can't even meet his eyes. He's just like, yeah, kill this man.
There's a fantastic bit where he says, I want to talk to the housekeeper, and Lestrade sort of says in this very casual way, you'll get nothing from her. And Holmes turns and he looks at him, and if looks could kill, Lestrade's face would be melting, and Holmes just says, nevertheless, like that. It's like it's like venom dripping off his tongue. It's fantastic. And then he goes from that to this wonderful fit of utter despair, chucking his his violin across the room, and just sitting in utter disarray in this room, completely desolate, because he thinks Lestrade's won, and then Watson has to pick him up and be kind to him, and there's this lovely little bit with their relationship in that, and then when he figures it out, it's like, oh, I'm fine again, I'm okay again now, and he goes back into charismatic Holmes business, right through to the bit with the buckets of straw and starting the fire. And Jeremy Brett does this fantastically camp thing where he's conducting the coppers in their shout of fire. It's brilliant.
A little bit louder.
Right. Yeah. We can do better than that, gentlemen.
I love that he asks him, so would you happen to have any coppers within like shouting range of you? Well, I've got 3, and I would assume that these are large men with loud voices. Presumably, yes. Please bring them up and tell them to bring some straw, would you? It's literally like, I'm going to use the police state for my own purposes. Like he's setting a stage. Literally, he's setting a stage at that point. And it's pretty delightful.
Yeah, this episode is great in sort of elucidating how you understand why he turns to drug addiction, because his primary drug is solving problems. And when he doesn't have a problem to solve, or he hits a stumbling block where it seems like he can't solve a problem, he just goes into a deep depression. And then you see him in his bathrobe with papers scattered everywhere, and he's just depressed as all hell. It'll be a common thread through all three of these episodes. I think Jeremy Brett's performances are some of the best from the series in these episodes. I love how he, like you mentioned, he gets Watson to do the deducing for him early on. It's like, Watson, explain why I know this about this guy. And Watson actually picks it up. Like Watson has caught on to the sort of simple deductions that Holmes does whenever he meets a person, where it's like he just, through observation, here's why you're this, here's why you're that. And I'm probably, 90% of the time spot on as to why you're, here. I like that Holmes is super excited by the fact that he doesn't instantly know everything about this case. This is one where Holmes and Watson have to actually do a lot of footwork on the investigation instead of just interviewing people. A lot of the times it's like 90% Holmes interviews a bunch of people and it's like, I've got it. I've solved the case. But here they actually have to do some fucking forensic work and stuff like that. Like they have to look around and figure out.
Well, there's even a bit like at the beginning where it's like, oh, have you seen the newspaper? No, I've just brought it up. And then, like, because he hasn't read the newspaper, we have to, like, get it, like, explained to us in the audience. Whereas, like, if you'd read the newspaper, you'd be like, oh, no, I solved this already. It's like, it's over, Like, that's...
and talk about Holmes and Lestrade's sort of rivalry here. Just how silently pissed off Holmes gets by Lestrade's initial investigation, basically contaminating the crime scene, because Holmes is working on a slightly different level than Scotland Yard, where he has early forensic stuff going on in his mind. Like, I need the crime scene to be untouched so I can see everything as it was left. And they're just fucking around, like leaving footprints and moving stuff and knocking papers around and shit. And he's like, oh, you fuck. And then he's also pissed off because
I do want to hear Jeremy Brett say, you fuck, in exactly that tone of voice.
Lestrade, you fuck. And also he's just really pissed off because there's a moment where he's like doubting himself. Perhaps Lestrade has actually done a good job for once. That motherfucker, he might have actually beat me. And so
I like to think that Lestrade is mostly fine. Like, but then like you get the like weird ones, and then suddenly Lestrade's kind of off in his own, kind of.
You almost feel like Lestrade stumbles when he's doing cases with Holmes because he's actually trying to compete with Holmes. Otherwise, he probably wouldn't stumble as much in other cases. But then again, the cases that Holmes takes on are extraordinary cases too. So it's like, Lestrade's perfectly fine catching like your commonplace murderer or whatever, right?
And I'm not saying I know anything about this, but certainly law enforcement, they have like enormous tools to solve these things, but they're really lazy and they're like beholden to certain class interests and people who might want to find people per se or solve certain kinds of crimes who are not invested in that same kind of society use more innovative methods. Again, I don't know anything about those sorts of things.
No. There is a kind of snobbery problem inherent in the whole Holmes Scotland Yard dynamic in the stories, because in the stories Holmes and Lestrade are both middle class, right? But Holmes is kind of slightly on his upper middle class, and his family are like rural squires, and he's got famous French actors and famous French artists in his lineage. Whereas someone like Lestrade, most of these early inspectors and detectives, they were kind of like first generation middle class, just up from the working class. So there is kind of this thing in the stories where the detectives are all sort of these clod hopping yokels and and oaths and stuff, and it takes the son of a country squire to come in, and it's a bit unfortunate, but I that doesn't really come through so much in these adaptations.
But and law enforcement is a way of sort of entering a sort of like middling class from that lower class ultimately, and that's one of the like things that even just to kind of restate it in more kind of like commonplace American terms is like, yeah, we'll give you a decent job. You work for 20 years and you get your retirement, and you go off and do your thing. That's a better job to get than most of the jobs, and that's how you attract people to betray a working class ultimately.
And that was definitely a thing in this
and also
era.
Beat black people with a club. That's a that's a thing.
Yeah.
Not to say that every cop is going to do that,
but it does attract a
certain
amount of people who are up for that.
A certain class of people, if we can use the pun. We're way off topic at this point, but what else are we going to do? Like actually talk about the thing we're supposed to talk about?
If our friend Court Psyops was here, he'd probably have something to say about cops right now. But
we should bring him on.
Yeah.
I'll just say if people are interested in the subject of like early fictional detectives and early fictional police detectives and private detectives in English literature and their relationship to the actual phenomenon of like detectives starting in the early police force, they should read a book called The Invention of Murder by Judith Flanders, which is a really good book on that. That's my recommendation for that, and it saves us having to have the conversation. So
there we go.
Yeah, just go read a book instead of listening to us talk.
I will
Hit pause right now.
I will say I'm glad you brought it up, Daniel, though. The more I watch this series, the more it is really focused on highlighting the lower classes of British society at this period. It's just the major disparity between the upper class, the middle class, and the lower class is really fucking striking. Is presented in this series, where either you've got a job and you're just barely surviving, and you have maybe good clothes and a house, but just barely, and you're maybe like one little stumbling block in your life away from all of a sudden becoming the fucking tramp drinking from a bottle, because the tramp he talks to is a war veteran, and he's just moving around from town to town. He's drinking from the bottle. He's wearing his old fucking uniform that he had when he was in the service, and there's nothing there for him. There's no social safety net or anything like that for
absolutely him. No. There's a real strain of social commentary in this episode, and it does come from this is another thing I've been saying about this series. Part of what's great about it is it does take this stuff that's in the original texts, but it really does develop it and work it up, so that they make these very thoughtful adaptations. So you get all this. There is a lot of social commentary in this episode. There's a lot, as you say, about the tramps, and you get the feeling that the McFarlanes are kind of just hanging on, because the father died, and then the young man has his job as a lawyer, a solicitor, and they're doing fine. But the mother is dependent upon him, and you get the feeling like if he goes to jail, if he gets hanged, she's going to be out on the street. That's kind of implied, I think. And meanwhile, there's this guy Oldacre, who's this really successful businessman. He's got money piled up, and it's not enough for him. He wants more and more. And his big plan is to just kill this tramp. I mean, spoilers, but that's what he does. They just think, well, we'll lure this tramp in and kill him and pass his body off as mine. So they just have no respect for this guy's life whatsoever. He's just material to these fucking people. And you get that from the housekeeper as well. Holmes sort of tries to draw her out on her attitudes, and she just says, well, I work, why can't they work? This woman who's like, she's probably first generation middle class herself, housekeeper, and she's just got her fingers into the next rung up, and it's like, yeah, fuck the poor, and it's, yeah.
I like that. It actually shows a tramp putting down like a tramp mark basically in the property to like, hey, this is a place you can go to get free clothes. He thinks it's a place that's like charitable to vagrants and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
there's a lot of that sort of social observation in the stories. Conan Doyle had a real eye for stuff like that. And as I say, another thing I love about this story is the whole thing about, I think Oldacre's a brilliant villain because he's so nasty. He's such this
piece of
venomous, hateful, vindictive bastard, and there's sort of that vicious scoring out of the woman's face in the photograph, and all this years later because she spurned him. It's a great comment, I think, on
and the
on
excuses.
That kind of man.
the excuses the guy makes for himself too. It's like, oh well, John McFarlane, he wouldn't have. I would have made sure he wouldn't have hung. It's just a joke. It's just a prank. Like, no, you're fucking with people's lives just because you're this petty misogynist motherfucker who didn't get the woman he wanted early on in your life. Like you're a piece of garbage.
Yeah, and you've held on to that for years, and now you're doing this despicable thing because finally you see your opportunity to get petty revenge and ruin two people's lives, and murder a guy, and then effectively murder another guy, and also make off with all your ill-gotten gains and start a new life. Yeah, what a bastard.
The only other two things I wanted to mention, I love that John McFarlane comes up and introduces himself as the unhappy John McFarlane. It's like, okay, so that's something. And I just dug the sort of Victorian period fireman's brigade, the metal helmets that are.
Oh yeah.
And you can still see that sort of helmet design in modern firefighters' helmets. Slightly changed, of course, but still basically the same sort of thing. Great episode. I love this episode. It was good.
Yeah, let's move on.
Fuck that one. Who cares anymore? We're done.
Yeah. The Musgrave Ritual.
That's what we do. We just once we're done, we're done. Fuck that one.
Yeah, no, it's done. It doesn't exist. Musgrave Ritual from 1986, directed by David Carson, written by Conan Doyle, John Hawksworth, and Jeremy Paul. We have Edward Hardwicke this time as Watson, James Hazeldine as Richard Bunton, Michael Culver as Sir Reginald Musgrave, Joanna Kirby as Rachel Howells, Teresa Banham as Janet Trigalis, Ian Martyr as Inspector Faraday, and Patrick Blackwell as Trigalis. Synopsis here from Gary KMCD again. Accompanied by Dr. Watson, Sherlock Holmes heads off to West Sussex to spend a weekend with his old schoolmate, Sir Reginald Musgrave. In fact, Holmes isn't at all fond of Musgrave and confides in Watson that he'd had better conversation with Musgrave's butler, Richard Brunton, who is quite intelligent. Holmes soon has a mystery to solve when the butler disappears after Sir Reginald caught him going through his private papers and dismissed him. The documents he seemed interested in were a very old poem that all the Musgraves would recite as children. It's obviously a treasure map of some sort, and Sir Reginald admits that they all sought out the treasure at one time or another over several generations, but were never able to find. Holmes is convinced that by solving the mystery of the Musgrave Ritual, they will solve the mystery of Brunton's disappearance as well as that of another servant who has gone missing since. Jack, what do you think of this one?
Again, this is, well, I mean, I chose these, so they're going to be my favorites, aren't they?
Did you choose these?
I chose these, yeah.
And therefore, they're ones that you like? God.
You're catching up,
behind
Daniel.
the scenes.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes. Drama.
Well, it's not really behind the scenes because Lee actually left that in the end of the last episode, so it's actually.
Oh, I don't listen to this podcast.
Oh
I
no,
don't care.
I wouldn't recommend it. Yeah, no, don't do that. No.
Yeah, but this is another of my favorite episodes of this series. That's why I chose it. This is one of the ones that's most different from the original text, actually, because one of the things this series did, it's known for its faithfulness. And this is very faithful to the text in spirit, but it changes it a lot because the original story is just Holmes telling Watson about something that happened to him when he was a student.
Yeah.
It's like at the start of this episode, you see that Holmes has got this box full of his notes of his early work in it. In the original story, Watson
he puts his feet up on it. I love that detail.
Yeah. Yeah. Watson finds that box, and there's Holmes tells him all about these cases, like these fabulous titles that Conan Doyle gives the stories he doesn't write, the singular affair of the aluminium crutch and things like that. And the story of the Musgrave Ritual is one of those old cases in the box, that Holmes is telling Watson about in present day for them Baker Street. And so Watson doesn't meet Musgrave or go to Musgrave Manor or anything like that. That's all happening to Holmes when he's like 19 or something. So they changed
I like
this.
to think that this is like Sherlock Holmes as Encyclopedia Brown. Like he was solving this when he was 13, which would explain the trigonometry aspect, but we'll get to that.
Well, it is a bit kind of public schoolboy shenanigans, isn't it, in places? Yeah. It reminds me
I
of...
found out the height of a tree based on, and then I did some math, cosines, and therefore, it's very... I'm always delighted when trigonometry comes up, in anything because I minored in math, but also it feels very like of that particular kind of attitude. Did Doyle himself go to one of these like ritzy schools? Like, what's Doyle's background?
I don't know actually. I assume Doyle must have gone to a fairly good set of schools because he went to Edinburgh University because he studied medicine at Edinburgh University. I think that's right. Anyway, so he must have gone to a prep school and a public school and got the qualifications he needed that way. I'm pretty sure. I'm not tremendously up on the details of his life, but he's sort of upper middle class, Conan Doyle. So the fact that this is very much an adaptation with lots of changes, it allows them to put loads of stuff in. So there's a lot of this that is completely original. It's just something the writers dreamt up, and I think the stuff they dream up is great. Like they've got loads of stuff in this about Holmes and the drugs, and just blissful sequences where Holmes is off his fucking tits. He's tripping with balls during sections of this. And Jeremy, I mean, again, you said we'd be doing this. Jeremy Brett's just brilliant in those sections where Holmes is just absolutely fucking munted. It's brilliant. And I think it's a story that was very, I saw it when I was quite a young kid, and bits of it are pretty scary, like the stuff in, to a young kid anyway, like finding the body asphyxiated and propped up in a standing position in rigor mortis in the crypt and stuff like that. That's great.
With like the hand like up and like grasping. So, like it's a very like evocative image.
You see his knuckles and stuff are all like scraped and shit, and like he was trying to push the stone up, but he couldn't do it. And there's lots of Poe in this and a bit of M.R. James and stuff like that. I think M.R. James is later than this. But did you hack my computer and get my notes? You might have.
There is. I can't remember which one's
it's
written
almost
first.
if we all noticed the same references.
The same things, But I think M.R. James either stole a bit from this or the other way around. I don't know.
Well, it had to be. He had to have stole it from this because he was writing after Conan Doyle.
He was after, right? Yeah, so he's stealing it from Conan Doyle, which is fine. Steal away because you have the M.R. James story, A Warning to the Curious, which involves the finding of an ancient crown,
the buried Anglo-Saxon crowns.
Although anybody writing detective fiction after like 1900 is stealing from Conan Doyle ultimately.
But this isn't detective fiction though. This is different. But the crown in the crown in this story is the Charles I crown that actually wasn't missing. Like that was broken up after Charles I was there was the abolition of the monarchy by Cromwell, and then the execution of Charles I, and then that crown was actually broken up and sold. But here, for the story's sake, it's like, oh no, the crown was lost. Like when Charles I tried to flee, or his family fled, they hid the crown somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So this taps into that legend, and
this is the kind of education you get when you live in the Dominion of Canada, or the place formerly known as where the head of state is still the Queen, as opposed to those of us in the barefoot hinterlands.
I only know this story too because what it sparked for me was like, okay, this is the M.R. James stuff, Warning to the Curious, and I knew sort of the background of that. Oh, missing crown, and it was, that sounds familiar. That sounds really fucking familiar. Yeah, so.
I'm pretty sure there's only one king of England we learned about in my like high school history courses, and that's King George, and it's called "We Kicked His Ass." That's all you know. That's all you learn. And
well, you won't bait me with that because I'm on your side.
I'm not trying to bait you. I'm just trying to express my own ignorance. I'm just trying to say like I knew nothing of this. Like, oh, there's a crown and it's burned. Like, oh, that sounds amazing. That should be something we should have learned about in school. I have no idea.
We had a civil war too, Daniel. In fact, we had one before you, quite a long time before you.
Yeah,
and we killed our king, which is something I'm still very proud of. And but of course, then we brought them back. Fuck's sake! But there you go. That's the English for you.
There's an entire possibility we're gonna have another one pretty soon. So
but this is. I love this because one of the things about this is it does that great thing that great drama does, where it ties the themes and the plot together in a lovely sort of integrated whole. And I love the class stuff in this, as you'd imagine. I love the whole sort of setup with Musgrave as just this dim-witted aristocrat, and Brunton the butler as just manifestly much more educated and intelligent, to the fact where he knows Musgrave's own family history better than Musgrave does. And he isn't the slightest bit shy about saying it out loud either, which makes Holmes explode with laughter. And it ties in with the whole Civil War thing, because that's kind of about, it's kind of about commoners rising up and getting rid of their useless, dim-witted aristocratic lord, isn't it?
Yeah, Daniel, what do you think?
I like this one. I mean, I've been kind of like snarking on it slightly, but that's not in a negative way. That's in a just sort of like I enjoyed this one. I thought it was a fun story. I legitimately do love the schoolboy antics of like, we're going to use trigonometry to solve this problem, and we're going to like kind of go off and do it feels very much like, oh yeah, we're like Boy Scouts, kind of going off, oh, you turn west and do this many paces, and then like ultimately you end up on, yeah, there's this big castle with a thing, and then like you could have just figured out, oh, there's something buried somewhere. Oh, it's probably in the big castle with the thing. It's not like it's like deeply hidden. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, it's in this square of space with like a bit of thing that's cut out of it. Yeah, we could have figured that out through other means.
But the journey was the point, Daniel.
I agree. It's so much fun.
The real crown was the friends we made along the way.
The real crown was using trigonometry to solve this problem, although you learn how to do this in Boy Scouts with a piece of wood and a friend standing next to a tree ultimately. But it's I don't know. I'm not trying. I mean, I legitimately love that aspect of it. I legitimately love like, oh yeah, we're just gonna do this. As someone who spent a lot of time doing trig identities, you use none of that. And I minored in math. I know a lot of math. Basically, you learn all you need to know trigonometry in like a day, and then they make you sit through 4.5 months of it, and it's ridiculous. But
the point is that, as is the chemistry accurate is very important to drama. Also, very important to drama is the trigonometry accurate. So. And
the trigonometry is accurate. This is legitimately good trigonometry.
The point is, it's not difficult, but that's the point. It doesn't have to be. That document has been in the Musgrave family for literally generations, and not one of them has figured it out. And then just this guy who's just a school teacher. Yeah. A local school teacher, again, like first generation middle class, first generation servant class, up from rural peasant people. He's got himself enough education to be a school teacher, and he looks at the document, the poem, and he has enough imagination to read it figuratively and then think, oh, I just need to do some trig. So he goes to get the treasure, and he ends up finding just this lump of rusted, useless metal, and then it turns out to be the crown of the king that people like him, the insurgent middling folk, put to death all those years before. I love how joined up it is that way.
And a school teacher would precisely be the kind of person who would get it as something that's a trig problem, where, like somebody who uses this every day because he's teaching young students this and going like, yeah, there's somebody like in 200 years before, like in so this would have, when was the poem supposed to be written? In like the late 17th century, I guess?
Yeah, 1600s, I think, something.
Yeah, well, at that time, all these,
it's supposed to be written just after the Civil War, so it's about 1649, 1650, something like that.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry to be the guy that kind of like knows the history of mathematical development. All that trig identity stuff was actually new at that point. You used to hold like competitions in public squares as to who could solve quadratic equations faster before.
See, there you go, Daniel. These people weren't the super advanced trig fucking experts you are now. You super evolved what? Like you.
That told you.
I'm pretty sure they knew how to do Pythagorean theorem, which is all you really need to solve the problem. Yeah, it's basic trig identity stuff. Like, it's funny, like, again, not to get into the details of it, you really do like learn basic trigonometry, which is super, super useful. Sine, cosine, tangent, absolutely 100%, absolutely useful. And then like a couple other things, and then basically you spend the rest of that year or semester, however long you spend on it, like doing a bunch of bullshit that nobody should ever have to do past like 1750. It's completely ridiculous. Anyway, we have no need to go through my own problems with mathematical education in this podcast because we're already at an hour 5 and we have a whole other episode to cover. So,
So my thoughts, I love this one. I think Musgrave is a boorish twit, and I love that Holmes actually has no time for him, really. It's like, I wanted to talk to the butler again. And he's such a boorish twit that he has to hit the needle just to tolerate him.
Yeah.
And then Holmes just gets all fucking stoned. The performance here is fucking fantastic. I love Jeremy Brett's performance in this one, where he shoots up, and then all of a sudden everything's a giggle fest, and he's being rude with everybody, and he's laughing. That's amazing. And then it switches over to, like what Jack was saying, the M.R. James stuff, the Poe gothic horror kind of stuff here, like very Poe, like getting trapped in a space and dying. That's straight up fucking Poe right there.
Yeah.
Like, very, very well done. And I love that Brunton, he's so smart. He should have solved this and gotten away with it, but he's a poonhound and he scorned the wrong woman. And
yeah, a woman with a fiery Celtic soul.
yeah, and although she doesn't like, she seals his doom, but because she doesn't tell anyone that he's trapped in a hole. But it's not like she knocks the support away from the slab or anything. She's just like, well, I'll let him die because he's a dick.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And then she ends up dying too. And her body's found in water, kind of all straight up fucking Poe-ish kind of stuff going on in this episode that I just really appreciated. And again, the M.R. James stuff, warning to the curious, it just hits a lot of notes for me here. Like in that story, it's actually buried Saxon crowns that are buried to protect the shores of England from invasion or something like that. And then it's like a spectral guardian of that kills this poor guy who digs up the crown and finds it, and it's like, well, maybe I'll put it back, but by that time it's too late.
Too late, yeah.
Oh, and the BBC did a great fucking version of that. Changed it slightly, but they did a great fucking version of that tale. It was for the Christmas horror thing, I think. The BBC.
Yeah. Well, I'm a bit of a heretic on those M.R. James adaptations. I'm not tremendous. I mean, they're good, but I'm a bit less inclined to rave about them than some people. For my money, the better version is the Christopher Lee reading that the BBC did in year 2000. They did a series of 4 half-hour programs where it's basically just Christopher Lee, being M.R. James, sat in a chair reading the story, and they're just fucking brilliant.
Yeah.
And Warning to the Curious is one of those. It's on YouTube.
Yeah, so I think we all agree this one's pretty fucking brilliant too. Like this is a lot of fun, this episode.
And I do have to shout out Ian Marter as the local policeman. Harry Sullivan, Doctor Who, Harry Sullivan.
So at this point we're going to take a quick little break with some music, and we're going to come back for our last segment covering the Devil's Foot. Okay, The Devil's Foot from 1988. This is directed by Ken Hannum, written by Arthur Conan Doyle, John Hawksworth, and Gary Hopkins. And we have Dennis Quilley as Dr. Leon Sterndale, Damian Thomas as Mortimer Tregennis. I think I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, though. From what the people were saying as they were talking in the episode, it sounded like there was like another R there somewhere that isn't in the actual spelling, but I'm just going to go Tregennis. Michael,
they should have pronounced it in Italian, then you would be perfectly fine with pronouncing it properly.
That's right. Yeah.
Fuck yourself, Daniel, at this point. Like
I hate to correct you, but it's a hard G, so it's Tregennis.
Tregennis? Okay. Maybe that's where I was fucking up. Maybe my hearing's bad, too. Michael Atkins as Reverend Roundhay. Frida Dowie as Mrs. Porter. Norman Bowler as Owen Tregennis. Peter Shaw as George Tregennis, Christine Collins as Brenda Tregennis, and John Saunders as Dr. Richards, and Frank Morey as Police Inspector. And another Gary KMCD synopsis here. I get a feeling he likes this series. An ailing Sherlock Holmes travels under doctor's orders to Cornwall for a period of rest and convalescence. Dr. Watson accompanies him, intent on ensuring his friend follows orders, but they are soon approached by the Reverend Roundhay to help solve the most perplexing incident. A young woman, Brenda Tregennis, apparently died of apoplexy while playing cards with her two brothers, George and Owen, who are now suffering from some type of dementia. There are wild rumors going about the village, including that the incident was a supernatural phenomenon. Holmes believes there is a far more grounded explanation, and with the help of the surviving brother, Mortimer Tregennis, tries to determine who would want them dead. And we'll go over to you, Jack, for your thoughts on this.
This might be my all-time favorite of all of these. I'm just a broken record, but I love this one. I love the atmosphere, the melancholy atmosphere of Cornwall, and the stone temples and the stone circles that Holmes spends his time. He finds arrowheads and he's looking at them through his magnifying glass. I love all that stuff, and the melancholy music and all that. And
I like to think the Stones of Blood is happening just off screen during that sequence.
Exactly, yeah. But
that's a Doctor Who joke for anyone not like following along. Just Google it; it's fine. Just Google Mary Tam Stones of Blood, and you'll understand why I made that joke. It's fine.
Yeah. Exactly, and you'll find it a rewarding experience, probably. Yeah, so I love depressed, rundown, miserable, almost certainly, wearing himself to a frazzle by just living on coke 1 minute and heroin the next. Holmes. I just love the fellowship between Holmes and Watson here. Holmes is literally junking himself to death, and Watson's just put his foot down and said, "No, you've got to go to the doctor. You've got to stop this. You've got to go on holiday. I'll come with you, and basically I'll watch you to make sure that you don't keep doing this stuff that's killing you, And it's like this is part of the arc that runs through the series where you see Holmes grappling with the drugs. And I'm not going to get into sort of the big complicated question about drugs. It's drug use is a complicated political issue and a complicated personal issue, and I'm not going to moralize about it to anybody. But clearly, within the confines of this story, this stuff is not doing him any good, and he's got to stop it. And you get this moment of, I love the performance, this sort of moment of pain where Brett, just without any words, he just sort of looks up with this pained expression, and it's just like, I've got to fucking stop this. I've just got to. And it's like he buries the vial of whatever it is in the sand, and sort of covers it over. It's like he's laying it to rest. It's lovely symbolism. And then he's just, from there, he's just even worse. He's almost falling over because he's obviously in withdrawal. Yeah. And it's painful to watch. And then he gets into this mystery. And again, I saw this when I was a kid, and it's burned in my memory watching this as a kid, those sequences with the people around the table, the two guys that have been driven insane, and the way the music and the way it's shot and the acting, it's really incredibly effective. And then you get on to the hallucination freakout sequence with Blake engravings coming up and Holmes's face sprouting blood and shit like that.
Isn't that like basically? I was watching that and I was like, "That's like a fuck." It's like, did Ken Russell direct the sequence for this? Like,
that's right. Yeah. Suddenly, Ken Russell comes in and does one sequence, and then you get the wonderful moment where Holmes comes round out of this hallucination, like 5 seconds away from just being driven irretrievably insane. And he sees Watson standing over him, and he calls him for the first and only time in the series. He calls him John. It's lovely stuff.
That was the first time that was ever done in stories or adaptations.
I think it is, because I don't think he ever does that in the original stories.
Yeah.
There are moments in the original stories where Holmes suddenly sort of shows a flash of real affection. I think there's a story called The Three Garridebs where somebody almost kills Watson, and Holmes sort of freaks out, and Watson's terribly gratified about it. But I don't think there's anything in the stories where he actually calls him John. So that's original to this, but it's really affecting. And again, the plot and the themes are joined up. So you have like Holmes is there because he's wearing himself to a frazzle with his drug use, and then he kicks the junk and he's in withdrawal. And it joins up with the whole idea of like drugs being the murder weapon in this crime, so there's that, and then there's this wonderful humanity to the way it ends, where Holmes just says, look, he effectively says, I don't feel equipped to judge you. You did this thing and it's terrible, but who the hell am I to destroy your life because you did what the law would have done to this guy anyway, just in a different way. And that's another thing that Conan Doyle does again several times in the stories. There's several stories where the murder turns out to have been an act of revenge, and Holmes he can see the murderer's point and he sort of lets him off. And it's this lovely. There's a really lovely humane aspect to it, and I just love the journey from Holmes on the point of death at the start of it and rejuvenated through the course of the story. I love this one.
Daniel.
Jack kind of did the job for this. Just to kind of fill in some details on this. I love the rejection of the sort of supernatural. Like that's something that like kind of Doyle was interested in, despite his sort of interest in spiritualism, as I
later on, where
sort of thing. But I do like that's an element here. In a lot of kind of later stories and kind of later versions of the same kind of idea. It gets pushed too hard, but I think it works here. I like the sort of colonialist thing where, like all this stuff comes from Africa. Oh, he's an explorer in Africa and he's got this and et cetera, et cetera. And I do like that aspect. I think that's a kind of an important thing here. Although, again, like Holmes as this kind of like a representative of this kind of middle class version, always never can really kind of criticize that in the way that he should. Overall, I like this one. I don't feel as strongly as Jack, but I would like to kind of revisit it at some point. I think I was maybe a little bit burned out on Jeremy Brett when I watched this one. Quite lovely.
I like this a lot. I don't know if I have a lot of notes on it, but again, this kind of has the sort of same undercurrents of like kind of a Poe-ish and M.R. James kind of sort of thing running through it almost.
Hold on, did Jack pick three that have similar
like
loads of gothic themes?
Oh God, I can't imagine why that happened.
They're very connected, and like I love again Brett's performance in this because he's portraying someone who's coming down from drugs, who's like trying to kick the habit, and he's an absolute fucking dick to Watson throughout this thing because he's on edge and he's a prick. There's the initial meeting with the vicar where Holmes does his usual thing like, Watson, deduce why I just said this guy's into archaeology or whatever. And then Watson's like, oh, well, there's the mud on his clothes and hand and stuff like that. And then Holmes is like, no, you fucking idiot. I read his papers on archaeology. That's why I know he's an archaeologist.
It's all in the parish magazine. I love that.
Wow, you're left-handed because you have dirt underneath your right fingernails or something. And you hold the spade with the, and I mean, there is the sort of like, oh, where's the double meaning of spade in the context of 19th century sport? Anyway, we can get behind.
I don't know. I think you're reaching a bit there, but
I think so.
But I'm being a douchebag. It's fine.
But no, he's just such a unrepentant dick to Watson in this, and Watson is just like the best friend ever. Like he's just taking this shit, and it's no fuck you, and that's very much That's very much like an intervention, kicking your friend off of drugs kind of thing. Like you stand by them even if they're total shits to you. Like the initial scene where they're in the coach going up to this place in Cornwall. Holmes he's just this sour, dour piece of shit. And he's like, I really wish you weren't here, Watson. Like I kind of just hoped you'd fuck off. Like I'm all for going here, but I wish you weren't here. And Watson's like, no, fuck you. In the most, polite Victorian British kind of thing, like he's basically saying, fuck you, I'm going to stick with you until you kick this shit. And from what I understand, like the whole idea of showing Holmes actually, symbolically burying the needle and all that stuff was done to appease like the audience kind of thing. Apparently they wanted to show the audience that, yeah, Holmes is the kind of like superhero that you can look up to, and he's going to kick these demons and be a better person kind of thing. I think I read that somewhere in a trivia piece somewhere, but which makes sense.
If that's why, that is a bit trite, but I think they handle it pretty well. They handle it with a lot of sensitivity, and I like the way it's mostly just left unsaid. It's
very polite Victorian British. Yes, of course. Let's not get into the intimate details of it. Let's just give each other stern but meaningful looks, and we understand where the other guy's coming from, kind of thing.
For God's sake, let's not talk about our feelings or anything.
No.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, no one needs to get an erection over this.
Well, I think Holmes is kind of touched by Sterndale's willingness to do that at the end, though, isn't he? This is this is an incredibly passionate man and an incredibly hurt man. For all that there's this big sort of colonialist thing about him that we might give us pause.
Oh, he's a lion hunter. Like, honestly, fuck that guy. Like,
yeah. What is his work that he's going back to do? I mean, it's probably enslaving natives in diamond mines, for fuck's sake. But within the bubble of the story, this is a
Colonel
character.
Kurtz needs me. You understand?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, but I think it does. It's lovely and resonant because Holmes can kind of look at him and see the life that Holmes didn't have and couldn't have had, because he says, I've never loved, and it's like he's coming to terms with the fact that this is just not in him, but nevertheless he can empathize with it, which is I really like that.
Yeah. And again, we mentioned the fucking tripping out scene where Holmes, and I'm sure Daniel would not approve of the lack of lab safety that Holmes is showing here. Where he just takes that fucking lamp and just burns the poison, and we got to test it out ourselves, or we're never going to know.
Yeah, so, I know nothing about such things.
So, and that's a great moment too. Holmes is like, Watson, you should get the fuck out of this room. I'm just going to test it myself and see what happens. And Watson's like, no, fuck you. I'm with you to the end of this. Yeah, and he helps kick Holmes out of the hallucination, and then Holmes has another moment of, fuck, Watson, you're the best, and I appreciate you, and I'm so sorry that I put you in this fucking situation, which is also basically an apology of, I'm so sorry that I had to, have you along to help me kick this drug habit, really. Like, that's kind of an undercurrent, I think.
Exactly, because like Watson waking him up from the drug hallucination is kind of a metaphorical version of Watson pulling him out of the junk habit, isn't it? So Holmes's apology just does double duty there. And
also this whole episode is really just sort of centered around the fact that the marriage, the institution of marriage, is just kind of a tragedy that people shouldn't uphold as such a sacred thing, where it's, oh no, you can't have a divorce, like the sort of religious intrusion into the institution of marriage, where if only the doctor there could have had a fucking divorce and married his lady love, maybe none of this would have happened.
Yeah. And also this wealthy family of probably tin miners, I suppose, that all it takes is this feud about dividing up the spoils of the tin mine, or however they got rich, and two of them get driven mad and sent to the insane asylum, and one of them gets killed because this guy, I want all of it.
I like how and I like how one of the brothers who goes mad as he goes by in the wagon where he's being transported to the asylum. It seems like there's a shot of his face where he seems like he has a moment of clarity, almost, of like what's going on, because he sees Holmes and his brother, as he goes by in the wagon, and that's like some seriously haunting shit. Like
it is, isn't it? Yeah.
There's no good end for that guy. Like, that guy's just damaged beyond repair. He's going to be in an asylum for the rest of his fucking life. And
absolutely, yeah.
And it's this tragic shit. And again, that's straight up Poe. That's, well-to-do families, aristocratic families, just falling into madness by some reason. In this case, it's not supernatural. It's, a very natural reason, but it's very much the same kind of principle. Like, just your protagonist going crazy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so I liked it. I liked all these episodes. Go figure. They're all fucking great. So
they're all good.
Who would have thought?
Yeah,
except for Jack, of course.
Yeah. So, does anyone have any thoughts on what we're going to do next week? I mean, should we just do Without a Clue? And because we've talked about it a couple times now in this. We've mentioned it a couple times now in this series.
Without a clue. What about young Sherlock Holmes? That's no.
I've never seen Sherlock Holmes, so
yeah. But. Got the Guy Ritchie films to do last.
Yeah.
Murder by Decree is really kind of off the table because that was done kind of definitively already by you guys. So.
Yeah, definitively.
Definitively, no one else ever needs to talk about that.
No.
In my mind, anyway, it was a great episode. That's all I'm saying. But Without a Clue might be...
Without a Clue, I mean, do we feel like doing one more Basil Rathbone or like throwing on one other like something just to...
Yeah, we could do Without a Clue, and if Jack wants to suggest a Basil Rathbone, we could pair with it. It would be good.
Okay, yeah, I'll have a think about it. But we'll choose another Basil to do with Without a Clue, which apparently we're doing.
Which will be delightful to sit and to just laugh about that for a while.
I'm telling you right now, we ain't doing Holmes and Watson because that. Because I'll quit this podcast.
I feel like there are people who are gonna I feel like there are people who are gonna strangle us just over doing the Robert Downey Jr. movies. Honestly.
Well, I don't know. I think those movies have aged pretty well. Actually,
I think there are some purists who are gonna really get upset when we're like, yeah, these are actually pretty good.
Well, if any diehard Holmes purist has listened to this podcast, they've probably already damned us to the pits of hell.
Fair enough.
I kind of am a Holmes. Well, I'm a lapsed Holmes purist, let's say, and I like them. So if you fuck off if you don't like them.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, this isn't the Sherlock Holmes podcast. It's just us doing a series, and we're interested in delving into the shit. So. As fans, that's the whole.
If there are three things that we know about the British canon, here's what the Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes films are good, reasonably good adaptations of Sherlock Holmes. B. William Shakespeare did not write the plays.
Oh yeah, right. I heard that.
3. William Shakespeare did write the Arthur Conan Doyle Sherlock Holmes stories.
Whoa.
Those are the three things that we should all just accept as given as we move forward in this podcast.
I dig that Shyamalan twist you just threw in there. That's great stuff. Like, holy shit.
He was 200 years old.
Yeah, things will never... Yeah, M. Night Shyamalan twist there, like fucking William Shakespeare's a vampire. I'm sure there's actually been, fiction about... Shakespeare being a vampire. It's probably an Anno Dracula or something like that.
It turns out that Sherlock Holmes was an adaptation of the original Shylock character.
At this point, somebody has done every variation of Sherlock Holmes, William Shakespeare, vampires, all of it. Every possible combination of any one of those things that you can possibly do. Dracula, Sherlock. Somebody's done it. So.
Yeah, so
I like to think that there's some writer who's going to listen to this podcast. Like there's somebody who's going to become the new J.K. Rowling writing the William Shakespeare actually wrote Sherlock Holmes, and we're going to get none of that money. So it's going to be delightful.
I'm just kind of hoping we're dissuading people from writing at this point because I'm hoping someone listens to this is like, well, fuck, my vampire story's shit now. I don't need to write this.
Nobody needs to write any more vampire stories at this point. We need a moratorium on vampire stories for at least a decade.
I don't even know what people should write more about now. Maybe mummy stories?
Something else?
They're gonna go back to zombies. It's gonna be fine.
Yeah,
we're just on a continual 15-year cycle of zombies and vampires forever.
That's right.
Yeah.
No, I just had a thought. It's gonna be, it's gonna be like vampires in a Jewish deli, Nosferatu.
What? That doesn't even work.
Lee thought it was funny, and that's the only reason I make these jokes, Jack. You don't understand the degree to which I just sit here and make Lee laugh.
Okay, fuck this, Jack. Tell people where they can find you before this thing falls apart.
Okay, you can find my inaccurate trigonometry at my Twitter page, handle, feed, I don't know, which is @_Jack_Graham_, where you can find links to all my inaccurate organic chemistry at my blog, Shaboom Graffiti, which is at Editorial Press, and my various podcasts over the years with various people, including the one I'm doing at the moment with your very own accurate chemist and trigonometrist, Daniel Harper. I don't speak German.
Trigonometrician.
That's it.
That's when you're the landed gentry, but only in triangle shapes.
Yeah.
All right.
And also vampires.
Yeah.
All right, Daniel. Where can people
that
find
podcast that he mentioned but didn't actually name because I suspect he was trying to toss it over to me, and then I made a bad joke. So I don't speak German because I don't speak German, but I listen to a lot of terrible people talk about really terrible things, and I talk about it on a podcast. We're working on a book. It's going to be great. Anyway, you can find that at I don't speak German.libsyn.com, and you can find we have a new Twitter, IDSG Pod.
Yes,
at IDSG Pod. If you want to follow that, I think we have like 100 people following that at this point. We have one tweet because I tweeted out we don't have an episode this week. I did that this week because we didn't put an episode last week, but we'll do more. It's going to be great. But yeah, go check us out.
Awesome. I genuinely thought I did name the podcast, but it's 2 a.m. and I have no idea.
You can, of course, find us at tmbdos.podbean.com. You can find our Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Facebook links. Join the Facebook group. Best way to find out what's going on the podcast. And yeah, until next week, we're going to be doing Without a Clue and something from Basil Rathbone. Yeah, and then after that, one more week.
We're doing Without a Clue and something good.
Something. Wow, spoilers! Holy shit!
Yeah, Without a Clue. I actually like Without a Clue. I saw it once. It's cute, but we'll do something cute and something Clue. I was going to say blue, but Clue. I don't know. I have no.
Whatever.
Jokes. There are no more jokes. It's over.
If you've listened this long enough, you're gonna like it. So just fucking suck it up and wait for it to show up in your pod feeds. You fucking animals who just can't get enough of our shit. That's all there is to it. And thank you very much, animals, for listening. And thank you guys for joining me. And we'll be back next week to feed your minds with bullshit. Goodbye.
Wow, that took a dark turn at the end.
Yeah.
You have been listening to They Must Be Destroyed on Sight. For other episodes, our links to Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and our Facebook group, as well as links to podcasts and websites of similar interest, please visit us at tmbdos.podbean.com. Thank you. Drive through.